Good evening, everyone. I'm Jen Foley, and I'm the chair of Williamson County Democratic Party's Legislative Committee. We formed this new committee with the goal of keeping our members informed about what's happening at the state legislature, including the good and bad bills, and especially how members of the Williamson County delegation have voted on those bills. You may remember that we kicked off the legislative session with a preview discussion with Representative Bob Freeman. And throughout the session, we've tried to post weekly updates on our social media pages, our website, and in our e-newsletters. So if you're not getting those, sign up. We hope that this information has been helpful and yet not too disheartening. And now that the legislature has adjourned, we're thrilled to have Senator Heidi Campbell joining us to dissect this whole legislative session. We'll talk about the legislation that passed, the good bills that never had a chance of making it to the governor's desk, and what comes next. And we'll also be taking questions from the audience, so please type your questions in the comment section. Senator Campbell represents District 20, which includes the outer suburbs of Davidson County, including Oak Hill, Belmead, Bordeaux, and Goodlettsville. Senator Campbell served as the mayor of Oak Hill, and she holds an MBA from Vanderbilt. She's a Nashville native, a former music industry executive, and a mother of two. Senator Campbell defeated independent Steve Dickerson to win her election, which made her the 6th Democrat in the state Senate and only the 8th woman currently to serve in the Senate. So her voice is greatly needed in the legislature, and we are very grateful that she is joining us tonight. Without further ado, welcome, Senator Campbell.
Hi there. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be with you.
Thanks for joining us. How are you? Have you had a chance to decompress since the legislature adjourned last week?
I'm sorry, you broke up for a second. What'd you say?
Oh, sorry about that. I was asking how you are and if you've had a chance to decompress since the adjournment last week.
Yes. Yeah, you know, it was a brutal session, and I was surprised by how much I needed to just take a couple of days and get some sleep. I slept for the better part of 2 days. But I do feel rejuvenated and ready to go. So
that's great.
Yeah.
We need you. We need you in fighting spirit. So that's sort of what I wanted to talk about first before we assess all of the damage done. I wanted to ask you about your general impressions of the legislature and your experiences there. What was it like to actually be working on the Hill this year?
It was really, it was a lot like moving or having a baby. And as much as you think you know what that's like until you actually do it, because viscerally going through it is different. And so intellectually, I suppose it was exactly what I thought it would be, just in terms of being a political situation where you're sort of navigating the fact that you're in a super minority, and you know that there's a lot of stuff that you're not going to be able to get done, but you know, the camaraderie of the Democratic caucus really made it so much easier than I thought it would be. We have a great group of Democrats. We have a fabulous staff, really great research teams. So that really helped. And also, you know, there's a Bugs Bunny, you're probably too young to know this, but there's a Bugs Bunny cartoon where a wolf and a sheep are fighting all day long. And right before they go in to fight every day, they clock in and they say, "Hey, Fred. Hey, Jeff." And that's kind of what it's like. I mean, the Republicans are you know, very nice people personally. And so I was able to get to know them and get to be friends with them. I consider them friends or frenemies, I guess. But, you know, in the final analysis, the legislation was pretty caustic, a lot of it.
Yeah, I was really interested about the dynamic between Republicans and Democrats, because from an outsider's perspective, it seems like it's vitriolic and yeah, you're fighting all the time and just diametrically opposed viewpoints. And so to hear that you can make friends with these people is kind of surprising to me, but good. It's encouraging. That's good.
Yeah, it is. And I have to say that people told me that this was pretty much one of the most divisive and controversial legislative sessions that they'd ever seen. So one would hope that it could only get better. Unfortunately, we were spending a lot of time on slate of hate kind of issues. And I think that it would have been different if Biden hadn't won. I think that what was really happening in this legislative session was an effort to wrest, like WREST, wrest control from local cities, from basically Memphis and Nashville, and then also from the federal government, because they want to hold on to the power that they have, and they want all the toys. So
yeah, maybe they wouldn't have felt so challenged. In my heart of hearts, I kind of think of it as, hopefully this is like the last gasp, and they're trying to hold on with everything that they have. But yeah, we'll just have to see.
Well, yeah, right. With redistricting coming, we'll have to see.
Yeah. Did anything really surprise you about being on the Hill? Anything really unexpected?
I'm not much of a person for ritual, but some of the ritualistic processes that were really meaningful to me. I mean, when you start session, you have a delegation from the Senate that has to go announce to both the House and the governor that you have begun session. And there were some ceremonial things like that. And then there were also, and I'm sure this happens every session, just meaningful life things that happened. The death of Senator Thelma Harper, and having her Lion State, and some of the stuff that was happening on a federal. I mean, we were there, during a lot of crazy stuff that was going on, across the country. So it was a very meaningful time to be there, and it was inevitably it reified my drive to win this, because it couldn't be more important.
Mm-hmm. Very well said.
Yeah.
And there were some lighthearted moments too. I saw the clip of you singing during the Greenhorn.
I'm required to do that.
Oh, I wondered what the story was behind that.
That wasn't just me deciding, hey, I think I'm going to go up there and do a little song and dance. And so the new senators are required to entertain the body on demand whenever they want towards the end of session. And so whatever. We came up with something goofy and
kind of like a hazing ritual, I guess, maybe. I don't know.
I think, yeah. There's another hazing ritual that's interesting too, which is when you pass your first bill, hopefully pass, they make it just really hard. They ask you all of these inane questions like, what is, and
oh gosh,
what are you going to do if this happens? And they make it really, really difficult. It's also just a hazing ritual and good fun. And those things are great because they're inevitably team building across the aisle. And the Senate is more collegial. So got along really well.
Yeah, it's a smaller body than the House of Representatives, so you're in closer quarters, and well, good, and you get to know people as individuals rather than just party opponents. Yeah, well, great. So I kind of imagine that since our legislative session is so short, members really have to hit the ground running when it starts. Do you think that your experience in local leadership as the mayor of Oak Hill helped you with that? Did it make the transition to the Senate easier for you?
It did. One of the things that made my transition really easy comparatively to how it could have been was that I ended up with the best possible imaginable legislative assistant, somebody who's an emerged sister of mine, and also a good friend that I've known for years, and also brilliant. And that's Beth Roth, who, is kind of like getting a Navy SEAL for a legislative assistant. So she and I were a team, and we kind of navigated the whole thing together. And I'm a team kind of person, so that was just so fortunate. I was really lucky that she offered to do that, and then also the rest of the leaders, staff, and Akbari's Democratic Caucus staff are just great. So I was able to scramble and get my bills together and make it happen. I will say that it's probably not ideal the way that's set up for future people running for office. I mean, because you're really intensely focused on the election, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh my goodness, I've got, a month and a half to come to get my whole package together. And I think that if I had not been so fortunate, it might have been difficult to pull off.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that because, not many people know how the legislature happens and how the work gets done. So, do legislators, I'm sure you have an idea of what you want to propose for bills, but does the Democratic caucus kind of divvy things up or say, that's a good idea, that isn't, you should do this? And how do you even write your bills? Like, where do you get the language? If you don't have a law background, how do you even know what you're supposed to be doing?
Right. Yeah. Well, they do. To your question as to whether or not the Democratic caucus kind of works with you on that, they do, and they're very helpful. But also, we have a whole floor of lawyers, legal. But just call them legal. And so what we can come up with any level of an idea for a bill. I mean, we can give them a bill that we've written and have them just vet that and make sure that it's, comports with our code. Or we can just say, hey, I have this idea, I'd like to do this. And it can be pretty vague, and they'll figure it out. So so they have been doing this for years, and they're really, really helpful. One thing that, you have to look out for is redundancy. I mean, there are at any given time several legislators on both sides of the aisle running the same bills, and sometimes in the exact same language, because they're legally required not to tell you if somebody about other people's bills. So that can be something that can be challenging, and that happened to us once. And what we did was we decided to kill our bill and just sign on to the other one, because inevitably it's about getting the legislation passed.
So you take that one for the team and get the greater good and get things done. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I did notice that I saw a lot of duplicate bills, either filed by the same side, or even, some that seem to be opposing sides. So that's interesting to know that. And then I read about the Gloria Johnson's Rep Johnson's bill that was kind of taken over by the GOP.
Well,
I guess there's some shady dealing too.
Well, yeah, that's a standard story there. Several times throughout the session, something that was actually pretty good would pass, and one of my Democratic colleagues would turn to me and say, yep, I started that 5 years ago or however long ago, and finally they're doing it.
Wow.
So, they are more likely, especially if there's a fiscal note involved with a bill, they're more likely to later if they think it's a good idea.
Oh, wow.
So that happens.
That's interesting. Yeah, I was surprised that the bill that would ban chokeholds passed, right? And that was a bill that was sponsored by Republicans. And I was really shocked by that. I don't know.
Exactly. Yes, that's a perfect example. You just picked a bill that actually one of my colleagues started years and years ago. And I mean, the exact same bill. And this year was the year that the Republicans decided that they were going to pass it. Medical marijuana is a perfect example of that. Mm-hmm. Democrats have been pushing for medical marijuana for years and years and years. And this year, it actually got discussed in a meaningful way. Unfortunately, the bill that passed on medical marijuana is actually a problem in place to prevent medical marijuana from really actually being available, because what their concern was. There are some Republicans in our legislature who are absolutely adamantly opposed to legalization of any form. They're part of the Reagan, don't do drugs era.
Just say no. Yeah.
And they think it's a gateway drug, and they're really, really vehemently opposed to making it available because they think it'll cause crime and all kinds of things. And so one of the things that they're doing is setting up a commission, and that's the bill that finally passed, to study how we should best roll it out if it becomes rescheduled. So if they reschedule it on the federal level, and that's something you start to learn around there. Start to get an understanding of the inside politics. But when you know who's running a bill and who's behind a bill, then it gives you pause for thought, and then you start to think about what's really going on here. And there's a perfect example of a situation where it looks like, hey, at least they're doing something. But really, actually, what they're doing is they're trying to prevent marijuana from being available should it get rescheduled, because it'll be caught up in the whatever machinations of their committee. So that's it. But on the other side of the coin, there was a Republican that is very, very conservative, and surprisingly was actually running a really good medical marijuana bill. And I co-sponsored that with her, and was sad to see that one get killed, because that would have actually been, we're way behind the ball on that. And we had, just heartbreaking stories in committee, kids showing up that has seizures, and his mom was there and, explaining that this is life-saving for him, and, things like that. And that, didn't move the ball forward at all. So.
Not to mention that it could make a big dent in our opioid problem. And so you would think they would be motivated in that respect too.
Right. And then the business aspects of it, and, and all the ancillary, it's not just THC stuff, it's also hemp, and it's, there's an industry there that we're not, that we're missing out on. Moreover, and the Republicans, that was what was weird about it, just because a lot of Republicans were standing up and saying, well, people are just going to drive, across the border and get it anyway. So why are we, and then they're going to come back and it's illegal, so then we're increasing crime. Right.
Increasing incarceration. And also, we could be helping our small farmers and letting them grow hemp and well, they're already growing some hemp, but it's,
right.
That seems to me like it's in the Republicans taking over bills, it's like, how do you balance, at least they're doing this for and it is going to help Tennesseans in the long run. But on the other hand, we would have liked to have had the credit for that, especially when it comes to election time. So that must be, I don't know, bittersweet, I guess, when you see bills pass.
Well, and when you talk about the credit issue, I think that's super important for us Democrats, and that's something I'm trying to tell everybody right now, because I know that what we're going to see very soon is all of these Republicans, and Lee especially, are going to start taking credit for all of this federal money that's coming in. And we absolutely have to call them to account every single time that happens. I just recently did that with Marsha Blackburn. She was trying to take credit for some federal flood relief that we were getting. And we have to say, no, that's just not true. You guys have been opposed to this all the way. And so now, if this federal money is actually making a difference in your life, then vote for a Democrat.
Right.
This is what Democrats do.
Just today, they found a huge crack in the bridge going over the Tennessee River on I-40. And so it's the federal money from Joe Biden and the Biden-Harris administration that's going to help us fix that,
Exactly. So. Yeah, right. I saw that. Right.
Gosh. Yeah, we have to be better at messaging at the local and federal level. Yeah.
Democrats are the party of critical thinking, and I'm falling in line,
Yeah. Well, let's talk about more about what the Democrats could have done, because I know there were a lot of great ideas proposed in the legislature. Talk about messaging and what we should be doing for ourselves. Can you give us a recap of what, I guess maybe what the focus in general was for the Democratic caucus this past session and some of the bills that were filed?
Absolutely, yeah. So, I mean, first I would start with the good, the
Yeah.
good things that happened, and that will be brief, but they were very good. I co-sponsored a bill that prohibits law enforcement from using chokeholds. You mentioned that, and it requires law enforcement agencies to develop policies regarding de-escalation, which there is a very example that I don't have been very good at messaging. I think this concept of defunding the police has been really problematic for us. I think that what we should be talking about instead is reallocating resources and empowering organizations that handle domestic disputes and things like that to actually support the police and what they're doing. So that's what this bill does, and it was a Republican bill that was put forward by Senator Bell, which, you know, is wonderful. Bell is usually not somebody we agree with. So that was a great bill, and really proud to have been a part of that. There was another bill, you know, I think probably inspired by the pending execution of Purvis Payne. And Purvis Payne is somebody who's on death row and has intellectual disability, and arguably and quite probably not guilty. But in any case, it's a very sad case. I'm personally opposed to the death penalty, but this was a bill that redefines intellectual disability for the purposes of determining eligibility for the death penalty. And that passed, and it allows a defendant that's sentenced to death prior to the effective date of the act to petition the court for a determination as to whether or not they're intellectually disabled. And it won't help Purvis Payne, but at least going forward, this is something that, you know, we were able to pass, where in the future, people with intellectual disabilities will not be sentenced to death. There was another bill. I'm sure lots of you know that we currently have the largest TANF reserve fund in the nation. TANF is Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, which is money that the federal government sends to the states. It's our tax money that's supposed to go to needy families. And what we've been doing is banking it and not getting it out to needy families because we're such a regressive state. And we have a balance of over $700 million. And so I co-sponsored legislation that offers a pathway to self-sufficiency for TANF recipients. And it provides for investment in community partnerships through both spending down the TANF reserves and also for plans for recurring dollars, which is, you know, something that's important and doesn't often happen. Because obviously if we have recurring dollars, there are programs that we can keep going. Right. And it also establishes an advisory board, which I'm not really happy about, because I have to tell you, in general, I am opposed to the Republican efforts to constantly have boards and commissions, because they are populated entirely by Republicans. And I think that a lot of what really goes on with them is that they are in place for the purpose of preventing money from getting to people, because they just don't want money to go to people. They feel like that's a handout. So that part of it I wasn't crazy about, but at least we're loosening up the TANF funds and getting it to people. And then at the very beginning of session, we had two special sessions. The first one was for a Medicaid block grant, which is just insane. That's crazy. It's just yet another attempt to not expand Medicaid. And probably is unconstitutional. We're waiting to see, if the Biden administration is actually going to overturn that. They wanted to rush that through before Trump left, so that's why we had that special session. But the other one was education special session, which I think was born legitimately out of the fact that we've just gone through a pandemic and there's been a lot of learning loss. And our basic education program formula is, I think everybody would agree across the spectrum, broken. So this is, a way that we can actually start to address some of those things, because basically they put a lot of money into learning loss in school districts. And once again, I personally don't think it was ideal the way they did it. There are some things in there that I think are going to be problematic, but at least they're putting some more money into education, because we are 46th in the country for education. And so, that's a right trend. That's pretty much the good stuff we did this year. So then the bad stuff we did, permitless carry, which is amazing, especially considering the current climate we're in. But in any case, we passed permitless carry, and that's very disconcerting. And I spoke strongly in opposition to it, but it passed easily on a bipartisan. Most of these horrible bills were just straight down the line. Democrats opposed, Republicans for. There was also a bill that will allow money lenders who are dealing on short-term installment loans to increase fees and charges on bankers or individuals who don't have bank accounts. So on top of interest rates and late fees that are already allowed by law, there are 3 revenue generators in the bill that will create more revenue for them and punish people who don't have bank accounts, which, as we know, are poor people.
Yeah.
And so that's a bad bill that's going in the wrong direction. One thing that I feel like on both sides of the aisle, there's not any attention that I can see on is the environment. And I truly believe that without a habitable environment, the rest of all of this is irrelevant. So I find it disconcerting. And I was so excited to get on the Agriculture and Environment Committee, because I thought we could do something. And then I found out, oh my gosh, no, these people are here to make sure that we don't do something.
Yeah, I think one of the only bills that passed was actually a bill, I don't know if you can correct me, I don't know if it's actually passed, but they wanted to deregulate the coal industry and give them even looser restrictions. And so it's going the opposite direction of where we need to go. So,
yes, exactly. Yeah. That's about what I was about to say. I mean, we haven't, we aren't mining coal. I mean, it's ridiculous that we're doing this, but I think that this was basically to do favors to an area of Tennessee that I guess has a big coal mining presence, and it's going to cost us more than $1 million annually to run it. And TVA has already stated that they're trying to get off of coal. It's just going in the wrong direction. So that's too bad. Then also, we have been getting one thing outside of, yes, you focus on legislation and yes, you focus on your committees, but one of the most important things is focusing on constituent needs. And so we have been getting inundated with calls from people who can't get their unemployment, and people who, need help navigating money coming in from the federal government. So I was upset to see that while these people have lost their homes and, were, struggling, that we actually passed a bill to reduce unemployment. from 26 to 12 weeks,
Yeah.
as low as 12 weeks. We
And I
already
know
have
that
the lowest payout in the entire country. So
it's ridiculous. And I know that Democrats tried to pass a bill that would kind of modernize the unemployment system to begin with, because that's part of the problem that we've experienced in this state, is that the system crashed and people couldn't get through when the pandemic hit. And I know Democrats were trying to get funding to fix the system, and the Republicans didn't even want to do that. Is that correct?
yes,
Yeah.
yes. And then also, did you see in the paper today that Lee,
Yeah.
you saw it?
I did. And I wanted to ask you about that too, because if the funds are being released from the federal government, I mean, can he just say no thanks? Can he send them back? Like, that's really how it works?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's really how it works. He doesn't. It's not a legislative decision, and it's so consistent with everything that happens in this state. I think that ideology for them is so compelling that they are willing to rob us of our own federal money. I mean, that's money that Tennesseans deserve, that's coming from the federal government. Sorry about that. $300 million that he just turned down. And yeah, so that's what they're doing with Medicaid.
Yeah.
Medicaid is, something that we just leave billions on the table every year for absolutely no reason other than, I guess, because a black guy was elected president. It's really unfortunate. So I was very sad to see that today.
It's really frustrating, and I think it's short-sighted as well. And it comes from a position of affluence, really, because if Bill Lee's from Williamson County, we're sitting here in Williamson County, and to be honest, most people are doing just fine in Williamson County, but it's the rest of the state that is suffering. And I know that you were part of the music industry. While there may be plenty of jobs in the service industry, those production crews and stage crews and musicians are not back to work. That's part of our tourism. And that's a huge segment of the economy that's still suffering. So,
yeah, and they cited 250,000 jobs that are available, but that is not ubiquitous. I mean, right. There are places where there aren't any jobs, and places where maybe there are a lot of jobs. And also, I have no idea what kinds of jobs those are. But I guess the argument that they're making is that people are sitting at home and not working because they're collecting unemployment, and they're just fine with that.
Yeah, well,
the people I talk to want to get back to work, are trying to get back to work. I don't know if you've talked to people who are collecting unemployment, but I think for the most part, surely there are going to be some people, but for the most part, I think people want to work.
Yeah, they do. I think the Republicans need to remember that old adage, walk a mile in their shoes, because there's a lot of people who are not getting through the pandemic very well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And actually, that is really just encapsulates the entire divide for me. I mean, I think that it really just comes down to whether or not you're compassionate.
Yeah.
And it's and then that brings us to the really ugly stuff, which was just caustic. I mean, I found it to be brutal, which I'm sure you've heard about most of them. I call it the slate of hate stuff. Mm-hmm. The transgender bills. These bills, as you probably know, are part of a national agenda. And, the Southern Strategy, which was started by Grover Norquist, or really even in the Carter administration, but basically was very, very well positioned to get a huge swath of the population to support an agenda that doesn't benefit them by motivating them on a handful of ideological issues that we'll never agree on, and just continuing to feed that to them. And I think that the gay marriage thing had already been accepted, and so now we're moving further, and it's now the thing is transgender. And my transgender friends and family and are people I love, and I just found it to be so hateful and hurtful.
Yeah, me too. And especially because the bills that passed were targeting children of all people, it's like,
Yep.
just let them be kids.
Well, and I people say, well, how do they think this is going to solve problems? Because we didn't have one single instance in the state of Tennessee of there ever being an issue with a transgender person wanting to play sports and making it difficult for a girl. And also, let's go ahead and point out that they don't really usually give much of a damn about girls. And this is the one time they're standing up and saying, we got to stand up for our girls. But in any case, I don't think that's what it's about. I think it's about political. And the other thing is, if you look at what they're doing while they're saying, hey, transgender, look over here, they're taking away local control, they're taking over our courts, and they're doing a lot of stuff that that really centralizes even more power for them.
Exactly.
And that might be the scariest stuff of all. And that's the Chancery Court situation, which that's a really, really big problem.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, because that's what I was thinking, but I was going to ask you what you think the single most detrimental piece of legislation passed was, and I was going to say the Chancery Court bill. I wondered if you felt the same way.
Yeah, I mean, all that stuff, that other stuff is horrible, but it's just mean and hurtful. But the Chancery Court bill is really, really bad. And for those of the people who are listening who don't know what that is, that right now the Davidson County, not every state has a Chancery Court, but we do. And it's a very, very specific type of law. And it's basically, for the most part, allows cities to or organizations to sue the state. And our Chancery Court is in Davidson County, and they basically, I think, because they were very upset about the way that the Chancery Court was ruling in a case that dealt with whether or not the city of Nashville had the right to issue mask mandates or keep schools closed, decided that they wanted to take over the courts. And so they are changing our Chancery Court. It's incredibly expensive. They're going to have judges that are nominated from each of the 3 grand divisions.
But first, they're going to be appointed by the governor for the initial term.
And they're going to be, by the governor. So, I mean, they're making sure that it's partisan.
Yeah.
And their argument was, why should Nashville be making decisions for the entire state? Which, if you're in that situation, I can tell you right now that they are really, really making lots and lots of decisions right now for Nashville and Memphis. And they have, when you take the election commission decision that happened last night in the city of Nashville, are you familiar with that?
No, I heard it vaguely, but I wasn't paying too much attention, honestly.
No, I mean, it's so much. Like, how can you pay attention to all of it? So, so that's the Davidson County Election Commission. Any election commission in the state of Tennessee by law is comprised of 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and then 1 person appointed by the governor. Okay. It's always going to be Republican weighted because it's always got 3 Republicans and 2 Democrats. And so, our election commission had 2 Republicans that were not, to their chagrin, were not actually supporting the Republicans in their push to get a tax referendum on our Davidson County ballot that basically said that the city of Nashville could not raise taxes. Davidson County has the lowest taxes in the state, and we haven't raised our taxes in years, and they're really not up to where they should be, and that's a complicated historical situation. But But there's a group of people that have been pushing basically to one, get rid of our mayor, and two, to get us to get this referendum on the ballot. So anyway, what they did was they got rid of those 2 election commissioners that weren't doing what they wanted, and they put 2 election commissioners on there that were. And they went ahead and voted to do that last night. But here's the rub. Now there's a chancery court that may or may not, depending on the timing of all this. I mean, that doesn't happen until July 1st, but nonetheless, if it's slowed down enough, we might be in a position where we can't even do anything about that. Yeah. And that's something, it's such a hard thing to message this kind of complicated stuff simply to people, because, you know, our bandwidth is all taken up with everything in our lives. But if I could say one thing, I really, really hope that people will pay attention to state level politics and what's going on, because what happened in this legislative session is going to profoundly impact our lives.
Yeah, because another bill they passed, which hasn't been signed yet, but it actually prohibits any city, municipality, or county from suing the state government about any constitutional issues. So anything, they can't do anything about it. And so it's a huge power grab.
Yeah, and it really impacts everything. I mean, you know, one thing that they did was they took away health board authority, so that we can't actually make decisions about our environment. You know, so there was a lot of taking away local control this session, and it's gonna actually start to feel that way around here, because and then that brings us to critical race theory. And critical race theory is, once again, something that was ginned up by Trump, but also by conservative groups, to say that we're teaching racism in school because we're talking about racism, that's teaching racism to talk about racism. But, you know, one thing that's thrown in there that nobody talks about at all is sexism. Like every single one of them says race, and every single point that they make is you can't talk about race or sex. So we can't talk about, you know, women's rights, right, the way we used to. And regardless of how that plays out, it does irrefutably have a chilling effect, you know. I mean, people are going to worry about that kind of thing and what's in their curriculum. And, you know, it's just the antithesis of what we need in education. We need critical thinking, and we need to be able to talk about those things. And of course, I think as Democrats, we all agree that if you don't learn from your experience, you're bound to repeat it. Right. So that was, and that was another thing that that made us feel like we were moving into the Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah. Well, this brings up a question. This brings up a question too. Someone from our party asked, do you feel that they're passing these awful bills because they see the winds of change coming? More Tennesseans have had enough, and they want to move forward, not backwards. So, you know, I think especially with critical race theory, it's such a contradiction in kind of hampering our education system when we're trying to recruit all of these companies from around the country. We want to be educating the new generation of leaders who are working in diverse workplaces. So how is it going to look to these companies that we won't even talk about racism and sexism in our schools? It's just crazy.
Yeah, I agree. I was hoping that Oracle would be absolutely turned off by that and actually pull out, or, you know, because need dramatic things to happen in North Carolina, so that, you know, so that with the bathroom bill, so that we can show our Republican colleagues how that's good, because they care a lot about business. Yeah. But apparently that didn't really impact them. To answer that question, I think that I don't actually. What I actually think is happening is that we are hyper polarized right now, and that if the Democrats who are in power on the federal level right now don't do everything that they can to aggressively promote actual democracy. And that's really the main thing, is voting. Voting rights, voting. We're in big trouble. So I guess I'm very, very, very hopeful that HR1 passes, because which, for people who don't know out there, is a federal bill that expands voting rights. But here's the main thing that it does. The main thing that it does is it requires every state to redistrict with a nonpartisan commission, which, as soon as you do that, Democrats are going to win, because there are more Democrats. Yeah. And so Mitch McConnell today said that that was a horrible power grab. And I guess, I mean, what I would argue is, well, I mean, if democracy, actually allowing more people to vote, is a horrible power grab, then I guess you're not really legitimately elected.
Yeah. If something is being done in a nonpartisan way, how can that be a power grab?
Right. Yeah.
So, and Travis, hi Travis, I see you there. He asked, so what's a good piece of advice you can give some folks who are discouraged by the wheels just spinning in the mud and often going backwards in terms of the supermajority continuously steamrolling hardworking Tennesseans?
What I would say is, you know, there's something egocentric about posting on. I mean, it's been proven that we actually release endorphins and have this relationship with social media and the bubbles that we're in that is very gratifying. And so it's wonderful to go on there and say, you know, look at this craziness, isn't this awful? Or even to engage with people and, you know, fight it out because we feel like we're doing something. What I would say is that let's get away from that, because we aren't doing something when we do that. What we need to do is actually physically show up at our Democratic parties, like the Williamson County Democratic Party. And thank you for doing this. This is the kind of thing that I think is so helpful. And actually find candidates that we think that we can get elected, and show up and make it our part-time job. You know, really, really, really devote yourself to doing it, because we have such apathy in our state. There are a lot of people that have given up, but I am proof. I am proof that if you work your tail off, you can do it. You can flip a seat. Yeah. And actually, Jen and I are going to be working later in a few weeks on identifying some of those opportunities. And I think that we really need to show up and also donate to candidates.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And I can speak as, you know, from experience as a former candidate. We need people on the ground, boots on the ground, helping get those candidates elected. It's not easy to run for office, and it really does take a team effort.
Yeah. So, yeah. And I think, you know, you and I spoke a lot during the election, and I think you felt, and I did too, like we weren't necessarily connected. Yeah. So I think we need to step up for each other.
Yeah. I think that the Tennessee Democratic Party at the state level is going through a revitalization period too. And so I have a lot of hope that we're going to have some strong candidates and strong messaging coming down the road from the state party too. So
I do too. I feel good about the changes, and also I feel good about you know, the Democrats that I'm working with. Mm-hmm. So we just need to work harder, build stronger, show up.
Yeah, yeah, and sometimes it means paying attention to the not so, you know, popular things like redistricting. I think, you know, we've already touched on that, but that's a huge issue coming up this summer. It's going to start. And I think a lot of people, first of all, probably don't even know what that means because I sure didn't when I was, you know, just living my life, not paying attention to politics, and what it means and how it happens here in Tennessee, because we have a very non-transparent system of doing redistricting. Can you give us an overview of what's going to happen starting this summer?
Yeah, so redistricting is done in Tennessee entirely by the controlling party, and they do not ask for any input at all. Zero input from us. And what they do is they redistrict us in rooms and do not tell us, make sure that we don't find out how they're doing it. And they are going to release redistricting is ostensibly trying to make it so that you have equal population in each district, but really, the Democrats are equally guilty of this. In the past, we drew crazy lines to try and control things, but the Republicans for many years have been doing that too. And really, what it's about for them is trying to gain more seats, even though they almost have all the seats anyway. So they have said that they're going to release their lines, their redistricting maps in February. And so the sign up, Jen, when is it? Like when?
It's usually in March is the deadline to run for office, I think.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So think about that, because that's no time at all. And they have an advantage because if, let's just say hypothetically, Jen, you decided to run for Jack Johnson's seat and decided, well, you better start raising money now, right? So you started raising money. Well, they might just say, oh, this person is running for the seat, so we're just going to draw a little loop around her house, and then you're out.
Right.
And you can run for it and then move 30 days after the election to the district, because you're allowed to run for a seat that, if you're not in the district, you're allowed to run for the seat as long as you're in the county.
Okay.
But you're not allowed to serve. So as soon as you had to serve, you would have to, get an apartment or move your family or something. So that's all a way of saying it makes it incredibly complicated for us to try and motivate and strategize for those seats, because everybody's taking a risk.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you don't even know if you're going to be running for the district that you don't even know if your district is going to be in existence as it is right now.
No, I would. Yeah, no, I'm sure it probably won't be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, for those people who don't know very much about it, states have different laws about how they do their redistricting process. But in Tennessee, there's no requirement that the, ruling party has to have public hearings. They don't have to publicly get any kind of public input at all. And so there's some organizations, nonpartisan organizations, who are calling on the state legislature to be more transparent. Like, I just attended a webinar last week by Think Tennessee, just kind of saying this is how we could be doing it to make it more, nonpartisan and equitable. But
yeah, I saw that presentation.
Yeah,
I loved them, and Shauna did such a great job with it. And yes, let's do those things. But inevitably, I think that the only way we're ever gonna fix things in Tennessee is if we do the hard work of getting people elected. But keep in mind that they did this. The Republicans did this several years back. So there was this whole Southern strategy where they took over all of these states, and they had to do it by identifying people in every little district who were on school boards and working their tails off. So we can do it. It's hard work, but I think that we have a lot of people who are highly motivated.
Yeah. And I think we've got a lot of organizations drawing attention to those types of issues too, which helps. And, like the League of Women Voters. Yes, I see that there's a comment. The League of Women Voters has been influential too, in calling for these redistricting changes. Yeah. And so after that, is there going to be a summer session? I guess a study session? Or?
Yeah, there is summer session, but I think that those are committees that are yet to be determined. So you have your two things could really happen to your bills if they're not passed. One is that they go to general sub, which really doesn't exist. It's just a way of saying, hey, sorry.
It's the bill graveyard.
Yeah. And then the other thing is summer study. And sometimes summer study is for real, like they really want to study something. And then sometimes that's just their nice way of putting a bill out to pasture. So, so there are some things in there that will be studied and addressed. I mean, my goal is going to be, number one, to focus on trying to help get other people up and running and support them and flipping some seats. And then two, this is a chance for us, for Beth and me, to build our legislation for next year. And really, now that we've been through one session, try and be, I'm so sick of hearing this word, but trying to be intentional about what we're doing, and, maybe find things that, have a good chance of passing.
Yeah. So that leads to my final question. What do you think that the Democrats need to focus on in 2022 as far as legislation is concerned?
I think we need to do everything we can to change the conversation and not get bogged down and mired down in their conversation, which we continuously do because it's so awful. They do a really good job of, making things awful, and then we get caught up in it. And, there's a degree to which you have to run defense on that. But let's start proactively talking about changes we can make to education. I was so proud of 2 bills that we wrote this year to increase the number of counselors and RTI instructors, reading intervention instructors, because they make a meaningful difference in our school system. And we were able to pass those bills through committee. And then, in the final analysis, they have fiscal notes, and so they didn't get passed. So, but I think that we have to continue to make those statements, because sometimes talking about these things, putting bills up that are going to fail because they get discussed, because they get some press, and because it forces our Republican colleagues to have that conversation is important. And Republicans, as is evidenced by that chokehold bill, are actually interested in some criminal justice reform stuff. So, so I think that's something that we can work on. This could not be a better time to expand Medicaid. For the love of God, I hope that we can. I mean, it's sad to me that Haslam's not there, because he was actually supportive of that. And I mean, the deal has just been made so sweet that I mean, how can we be saying no? So I mean, that's something that we as Democrats really, really need to push hard for, because that's a game changer in Tennessee. Infrastructure, because we're going to have all this federal money coming in, I think it's important that we do everything we can to participate in that conversation. We have a lot of infrastructure needs, and I guess, broadband is a part of that. And broadband is something that Republicans have also spoken a lot about, because, I think rural issues like broadband resonate with them. So, so those are some things that I think that we could probably get somewhere on. And and then of course, I'm always looking for environmental things. So,
and I wondered, President Biden's American Families Plan has so much in there as far as the infrastructure of care, right? So the infrastructures of families. Do you think we're going to see significant changes in Tennessee regarding childcare, paid family leave, anything like that, coming as a result of that federal bill if it gets passed?
Yes. Maybe not significant. I think we'll see some change. I think that this state is going to continue to try and dig in and be regressive and try and hoard money and brag about fiscal stability while we're not, helping Tennesseans. But there is a degree to which they can't do that, because some of this money is actually going directly to cities, going directly to programs. And so there will be a degree to which they can't do that. Another thing that I didn't bring up that I just thought of that's a huge issue that I'm working on right now with Representative Johnson is Department of Children's Services and some issues that we're having with, we have a very bad problem with helping children who are needing services of the DCS in our state, especially during the pandemic. So, you know, I think hopefully we can get Republicans to agree that the way these children are being treated is something that we have to address. So there are some systemic issues like that I think we can probably make some progress on too.
Great. Well, we're approaching an hour, so I just wanted to give you a chance to, I don't know if you had any final thoughts or words of encouragement or or anything like that you wanted to share with the group.
Yeah, I don't mean to be all gloom and doom because I feel like I have been, but I do think that that it's more important than ever that we actually get out there and work on getting some Democrats elected, and that's what the Williamson County Democratic Party is all about. So I just want to. The words of encouragement are these: it could not be more important to be doing what you're doing. And so thank you so much for participating in Democratic politics, small d and big D. Mm-hmm. And please, you know, roll up your sleeves and get involved, and don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm always happy to hear from anybody, whether you're in my district or not. So, so feel free to reach out to me if you have ideas for bills, or if there's anything I can do to help you get Democrats elected, or any ideas you have. Would love to hear from you.
Great. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your time and sharing your thoughts with us tonight.
I always love talking to you, Jen.
Oh, thanks. Well, we'll be talking a lot more soon too.
Yes.
On our separate project. But thank you all for tuning in tonight. We really appreciate it. And this will be available to watch later on. So share it with your friends, and have a good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.